Welcome into this week's edition of the Walkthrough. I am your host, Intern Joe Macheca. South Carolina fell to Texas A&M at Texas A&M by a score of 30-17 to move to 2-6 on the year. They will be left with the final four games of the year, all at home, all at Williams-Brice Stadium, for a chance to be bowl eligible. It will be interesting to see how they do down the stretch. Obviously, yesterday was a disappointment. Defense showed up in some spots, but you just couldn't get it done. You shot yourself in the foot. Wasn't the best game by any means. So you got to come home and get some home cooking these next four games if you want to turn things around. But I have a really good guest this week, the first ever recurring guest in the history of the walkthrough. So really excited for this one. It is none other than Tyler Head. We will get into that in a second. But first, I wanted to talk to you guys about who the show is brought to you by. First off, we got our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Tax ID is that uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call on the tax team at Liberty Tax. Fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood, open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in, give a call to upload tax documents, and when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call on your screen right now. And for those listening, 803-462-5576. Once again, 803-462-5576. Today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond over at the Movement Mortgage Network. Clint is always above us on all of our Gamecock Central live programming. In need of help with your mortgage, call on our good friend Clint Hammond at the Movement Mortgage Network. He's been in the mortgage industry since 2003, which allows him to help everyone from the first-time home buyer to the complicated and complex jumbo buyer. Whether you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance, nothing is more important than a well-thought-out financial strategy that comes with 5-star customer service. He's even helped our very own Wes Mitchell and former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth with their mortgages. So give our guy Clint a call. Once again, he's always above us here on our Gamecock Central live programming. His number is 803-771-6933. Once again, for those listening, 803-771-6933 for all of your mortgage needs. Now, here's Tyler. Hello and welcome back into the walkthrough. I am your host, Intern Joe Macheca. With me this week, none other than the Colossus of Clout, the great Bambino, the godfather of 107.5 The Game, if you will. He's had things locked down over there at 107.5 The Game for a good little bit now. The first ever recurring guest in the history of the walkthrough, none other than my guest today, Mr. Tyler Head. Tyler, how are we today?
I'm good. I did not know I was the first recurring guest. I guessed
Yes.
I was on after the Furman game. I guess that was week number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have you back on, and this will be a recurring thing throughout the winter as well. It's always fun to have you on the show. So Tyler, an ugly game yesterday at Texas A&M for South Carolina. Kind of just offer me your initial thoughts of the loss yesterday.
Yeah, I predicted on our Gamecock Central staff picks at the end of the week that South Carolina was going to lose this game 31-14. If we look at the final score, 30-17, pretty close to that, but in a weird way, it felt a lot more competitive than that. And I'll give credit to the defense, especially. They did a good job, especially early on in the game. Getting Max Johnson uncomfortable, making him move him around, getting some sacks early, and then in the second half, holding them to field goals. It's just unfortunate the offense wasn't able to click quite enough to keep them in the game, especially in that fourth quarter. Once they cut the lead down 24-17, they just couldn't generate anything past that. And now we're sitting here with a team that has to win the next 4 games just to get to 6-6 in bowl eligibility, and certainly not where we thought this team was. I definitely can see them still giving the effort. It's just when you're dealing with the injuries that they're dealing with, and we'll certainly get to some of that in a moment. You're just you're stuck at some point, and that's unfortunately one of the things that we saw rear its ugly head yesterday as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like stuck is a very good word to describe this football team at this point. They've had their opportunities come off the bye against Florida and kind of get things going. And then, they didn't, lost a really tough one at home. Then you go on the road to Mizzou, you lay goose egg there. So stuck. up against a rock and a hard place, if you will. If you're South Carolina, and especially this defense, showed a little bit of fight yesterday. Was able to get some stops where you needed it, but then the offense just did not do anything to help momentum wise, help this defense kind of carry some momentum into their next series. And, takeaways is a big thing that we talked about on the post-game show. This team has not generated a turnover or a takeaway since September 30th, I believe, was the Tennessee game, third quarter of the Tennessee game. Mike had the exact amount of quarters, but I mean, you went the entire month of October. Granted, with the bye, you got a bye mixed in there too, but you went the entire month of October without generating a turnover, and we saw how much last year's team kind of fed off of turnovers to get them going a little bit, especially down the stretch. This team hasn't done that yet, but Tyler, I mean, defensively, a lot of questions still be answered. I guess walk me through what you're seeing from this defense, and do you think there is a change in staff coming soon?
Speaking of the turnovers really quick there, and I was listening to y'all's post-game show, and Yuba said it was 13 straight quarters they've gone without generating a turnover. And this is actually the first time in Clayton White's time as the defensive coordinator, so just over 2.5 seasons now, where they've gone 3 straight games without generating any kind of turnover. And I think that just kind of speaks to the issues this team's having. And when you talk about generating turnovers, a lot of it has to do with just being in the right position and being in the right place, making tackles, those kind of things where, you can get interceptions, where you can force fumbles, those kind of things. And this team just looks lost on defense in a lot of ways. And while yesterday, my fear coming into this game that Max Johnson was going to go out there and have a career performance, as we've seen so many quarterbacks do this season. Will Rogers, Graham Mertz a couple weeks ago, that just go out there and completely toast the South Carolina defense, especially when it comes to secondary. And that didn't necessarily happen, but at the same time, South Carolina didn't do anything great on defense either. And again, I mentioned early on in the game, generating some pass rush. They got those 3 sacks on the one drive. I believe that was Texas A&M's second drive of the game. But past that, I mean, not a whole lot really hang your hat on. Got some tackles for losses, which was nice. Debo Williams once again leading the team in tackles, which has kind of become a recurring theme. I thought as far as the secondary went, things fared a little bit better, especially with a guy like Eamon Worry playing in a safety spot where he seems to be a lot more comfortable, where he's not having to be in coverage as much. He did have that one pass breakup in the end zone there, which I thought was good. But again, just other than that, really nothing to really note from this defense, which has kind of been a signature of them this season.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And shout out to Debo Williams. We'll get to our kind of key players, at least that stuck out. And Debo is one of mine. Give you a little preview of that little segment there. But yeah, I mean, looking lost is a good way to describe it. And, you've seen guys, I mean, to me at least, you've seen guys check in and out of games, right? Like there's been fight in some areas and then they lose it all of a sudden if things don't start to go right quickly. So, the buy-in factor is something I've talked about on this show quite a lot. I think, Shane Beamer's going to tend to have more of it just because of the culture and the way everything is built up on a morale standpoint. But again, when, you're 2-6, it's going to be hard to buy in and lock in, especially down the stretch when, you're kind of playing games, especially once that bowl eligibility kind of goes out the window. I mean, you're just playing games to play games. So, Tyler, I mean, in terms of effort, where do you think this team's at?
As far as effort, I mean, again, I think they're still going out there and playing as hard as they can. But at some point, whether it's scheme or just not having enough talent on the field, that's kind of where you're falling short. And I completely omitted one of your questions a minute ago, talking about if you think there's going to be a change at the end of the season. I would say probably so. Something that I've been saying a lot over the past couple of weeks, though, is Shane Beamer's never been put in a position to fire someone, because this is only his third year. And you could say that, yes, Marcus Satterfield probably would have gotten the boot at the end of last year if Matt Rule didn't come in and end up taking him out to Nebraska. And that's obviously not working out too well. But I would say most likely you move on from Clayton White at the end of the season. I know that after the Florida game, Beamer talked a lot about, we like the scheme that we're putting in. We're putting in these right causes on these guys to go out there and execute. But at some point you got to look at the numbers, and it's just not favorable at all. Even going back to last season, even in those games like winning against Clemson, winning against Tennessee, you still gave up a lot of yards, 500 yards against Tennessee, which I know that was pretty high-powered offense. They just hadn't showed the ability to stop anybody. And while you haven't been decimated with injuries nearly as much on the defensive side of the ball as you had on the offensive side, at some point, again, you got to point your fingers at what is being implemented out there. And again, it's easy to point your fingers to the defensive coordinator, but I think that's the only logical explanation. Or the only logical move you can make at the end of the season is maybe moving on from him and bringing in somebody else. Who that is, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I firmly agree. I think we have gone past the point to where, Clayton White can put things back together and play out the rest of the stretch and say if they played immaculately throughout the rest of the stretch. I think it's beyond that point. I think a change does need to be made at the defensive coordinator position. It's just they can't stop anybody, and they're having good individual performances, right? Like some game, TJ Sanders, Debo Williams has gone off. The DBs have been making plays. It's just a consistency thing, right? You're not making enough stops and enough spots to win games. So I would firmly agree. I think there is going to be some kind of change made defensively. And you're right about the Satterfield situation. And you kind of felt that. I mean, once Matt Rule got his job, it was a nice, swift and easy thing. So Beamer is going to be left with a little predicament, at the end of the season, whether or not he wants to fire Clayton White, and we'll see what happens with that. But all signs lead towards the firing coming in. So injuries, obviously, Tyler brought it up too. You can't really talk about this team without talking about injuries. Tyler, like my question for you is like, how much can you blame on injuries? At some point, like, guys are getting enough reps in practice to be able to make some plays. Like,
Sure.
Where does injury, because this team is very, very banged up. David Cloninger noted it yesterday. There were 12 offensive linemen that have been out at some point this season. Like, that's really hard to compete, in any league, let alone the SEC. Like, so where does it become an excuse or not an excuse? And kind of walk me through that. Like, how do you see this team with all the injuries?
Well, fans never like to use injuries as an excuse because they always say, well, you should have, guys behind them in the depth chart should be able to step up and do the same job on the same level, if not better.
Yeah.
And there's a reason guys are starters and there's a reason guys are backups. And they put this graphic up at the beginning of the game yesterday. This is the 8th different starting offensive line combination South Carolina's rolled into a game with this season. Look, I've never played offensive line in my life, but I know cohesion goes a long way. And when you have the same 5 guys starting on an offensive line, you're going to have a lot more success. Look at teams that win the Joe Moore Award on a year-in-year basis, the Michigans, the Georgias, Iowas, teams like that. They routinely never have more than 6 or 7 guys that's played on their offensive line over the course of the entire season. And when you look at that position group for South Carolina, again, it started all the way back in the spring. We lose Jalen Nichols, and that started moving pieces around. Casey Henry goes down 4 snaps into the first game against North Carolina, and then it's just been one thing after another, after another, after another. And it comes to the point where, and I give credit to Al Loggins for the game plan that he put in yesterday, where you could clearly see they did not want to let Spencer Rattler sit back in the pocket because you knew it was going to collapse on him really quickly. So they had him running out, buying a little bit more time and, having to adapt to the inefficiencies that you have on the offensive line. And, we talk about guys like Fugar, who's had to play a lot this season, who clearly wasn't going to be ready to play at this level. Nick Gargiulo, I give him credit. He's probably the second best offensive lineman that South Carolina's had over this entire year, right behind Rashawn Lee, who is somebody that's out for this game as well. Eventually, when you just keep moving things around, you're just kind of lost at that point and doing what you can. And, what Trey Jones goes down yesterday, and I think Babalati had to come in for him. And again, Babalati was banged up coming into that game. So I think that's a pretty legitimate excuse when you talk about the offense, just because name me any other team in the country that's dealt with this many injuries at the offensive line. You'd probably be hard pressed to find one. And you're going to have a tough time running the ball when you're doing that, have a tough time protecting your quarterback when you do that. And all things considered, when you look at the sum of the entire season, the offense is pretty good despite that. But again, it comes to a point, especially against a team like Texas A&M, which is the best defensive front South Carolina's seen this entire season. You're not going to have a ton of success. And just looking at their yardage yesterday, 209 total yards, lowest offensive outpoint of the entire season. And a lot of that, you take off a few yards for the sacks and the intentional grounding stuff against Spencer Rattler, but still, that's still only roughly 250 yards, which isn't going to win you many SEC games.
No, not at all. And I love that point. I think, at the offensive line position, when you're so banged up, and we knew the depth was going to have to come into play at some point this year, but you didn't expect Tree Babalade to have to start against Georgia and Trovon Baugh to start against Georgia. Like, that's so early on in the year, and those are freshmen, a part of the Great Wall of Carolina that you're bringing in that you wanted just to be able to see the SEC, kind of get adapted, get in a rhythm, get in a groove, get used to training and that kind of thing. And then, like Tyler brought up, Tree Babalata had to come into yesterday's game after being banged up, right? We knew he was shaken up. We knew he wasn't at 100%. And I know, like, he was on that second string because he was banged up, right? They really, really didn't want to have to play him yesterday, and they had to. So, and that can get in a freshman's head a little bit. I don't think it necessarily will get into Trees, but being injured in and out like that can kind of mess with you. But I don't think Tree is one of those types of people. But you brought up the quarterback. Obviously, we're going to talk about him. Spencer Rattler didn't have the best of days yesterday, and hasn't been having the best, like, been playing on par with the way he was playing the first couple weeks. He's slowed down a little bit, but he's still pretty efficient. 20 of 33 yesterday, 176 yards, a touchdown, 61% completion percentage, and his rating was 115. So not bad, but also not really on par with what we've seen. It's so hard, especially after watching that game yesterday, how much he was on the run, and how well Texas A&M did with kind of getting different guys in his face in different spots. You could tell he was frustrated in that one. But Tyler, this kid's playing for essentially his draft stock now. Like, what are you seeing from Spencer, and do you see him, winding up a first or second round pick after all this is done?
Well, I think it goes without saying he's the best player on the entire team, and you have your best opportunity to be in games when he's out there playing. And I saw people yesterday halfway through the game like, "Well, bench Spencer Rattler." I'm like, whoa, that's the absolute last thing they need to do. Let's not get crazy here. So, yesterday wasn't his best performance, and looking at that 20 of 33, you had 4 or 5 drops from receivers that should have been receptions. So you make a couple of those catches, that bumps that number up a little bit more. I do think, the intentional grounding was definitely a big black eye on his performance yesterday, and the mistakes that we don't usually see him make. But again, he was under a lot of pressure and dealing with a offensive line held together by bubblegum and duct tape, it seems like. But through 8 games this season, he has done a tremendous job of working himself back into the good graces of people at the next level. Because going into the season, I didn't see him on anybody's like top 10 quarterbacks, or like, hey, here's somebody that can maybe be a late round guy. Like, he was getting written off by a lot of people, and a lot of that had to do with how he performed for 80% of last season, which I get. And people kind of assumed he was just washed up and a bust at this point, and has come out and played really, really well. How many games this season we've seen him go through 3 quarters where he only has, 1 or 2 incompletions or something like that. So, yesterday's game wasn't the best. Certainly, I think he's done more than enough. And Jim Nagy, from the Senior Bowl the other day, we had a clip of him on one of our shows talking about just how much he's improved and just how highly viewed he is by a lot of people. First round, maybe that's a little bit much of an ask, but I've seen him projected, in that second to third round. And I definitely think he could be somebody that you could bring in as a backup initially. Maybe he sits for 2 or 3 years. You let him mold and marinate in your system. And then maybe you turn to him as your starter a little bit down the road. But I think he's got a very promising career at the next level. And again, has done a really good job and working himself back into that through 8 games this season. And I don't even want to think about where this team would be if he's not playing this year.
Yeah, I agree. And we saw plenty of the Norris Sellers comments, like, burn the red shirt. Like, you don't even need the red shirt at this point this year. Like, the season is lost, turn it over to the young guys. But I think, you owe it to Spencer to play him out the rest of the year. And, he's done a lot bringing, energy and national attention to this football program, whether you like it or not. You can't really ignore it. But I would agree. I think benching Spencer at this point would only do him and your program a disservice.
And it really shows how much of a leader he is too. And this happens pretty much in every single game. But, talking about the drops, Nick Harper had one of those drops early on in the game. And who's the first person over there talking to him, being in his face and, not in a mean way, but just like, hey, man, it happens. Let's get to the next drive and let's make this thing work next time. Like, that's what you see out of Spencer consistently this entire season. And I know everybody on the outside of Columbia, at least, likes to look back to him when he was at Oklahoma, or he was on that Netflix documentary when he was in high school, and saying, oh, this guy's, self-centered and stuck up and all this kind of stuff. He's not. He's changed a lot. He's definitely matured a lot, and he is the undoubted leader of this team. And you see that on display on a weekly basis, especially with these young guys who, talking about Harbor, talking about Tyshawn Russell, talking about a guy like Omega Blake, who are being thrust into these prominent roles because of the injuries, because of the things you're dealing with on this team. And Spencer Rattler's doing everything he can to make these guys comfortable and to help these guys along, which I think he's done a good job of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a big thing for those freshmen and all of these recruits that Beamer is bringing in, to have a leader like Spencer, have a leader like Trey Knox, showing you the ropes. And even, I mean, Nicky Wardy's still a young guy, but he's, been thrust into a leadership role a little bit too defensively. But to have these older guys, especially on the offensive end, because you're bringing in a lot of talent, raw talent, especially talking about Nick Harbor too. I'll get to him. But you're bringing on a lot of raw talent, and you just need some leadership, right? Especially through this tough times. Show these kids, how to make the mistakes and how to learn from them in the right way, so that way they can, continue to build in a positive way going down the stretch. So we're going to start a segment. I mean, I kind of started it a little bit last week, but this segment is called Give Your Flowers, simply just because there have been a lot of good individual performances out there for the South Carolina Gamecocks, despite the struggles as a team. So I have two. Tyler, if you want to go after, just two guys that you have seen production from, and that you kind of want to give your flowers to, if you will, somebody that's kind of unsung, if you will. I don't know. But my two guys, at least, I have Nick Harbor and also Debo Williams, two, I guess, guys that stood out obviously on the box score as well. But Nick Harbor being the guy to come in, step up when your wide receiver room is also decimated by injuries. Chief Wells out, Xavier Luedecke banged up, Amarian Brown out. So you look at a true freshman being able to do that. And Tyler, you brought up the Spencer Rattler moment where Spencer kind of consoled him, brought his head back up. He responded right after a drop after that, and I was very impressed for the true freshman. He said the game is slowing down to him a little bit. So I think it's huge for the team, trusting him to get a lot of yards and a lot of reps in the spots where, you're not really playing for a whole lot. So he can learn how to shoulder the offense when – the lights are the brightest. Like he'll be used to it at that point. So Nick Harbor's my first guy, and then Debo Williams, the second guy, just coming in, doing his job. It's exactly what you need to do, especially a linebacker this season for this defense. You need to do your job, tackle, and he's tackled well. Seems like he's leading the team in tackles every week, and kind of unsung considering how banged up this defense is and how bad they've played as a whole. Debo Williams definitely deserves some shine, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and those are probably be the top two guys on my list, but I'll look elsewhere here just to be a little bit different. Josh Simon, it's been nice to see him come along a little bit more in these past couple games, and obviously we knew that throwing to the tight ends was going to be a little bit of a bigger deal this season, especially given that Dow Loggins was tight end coach coming from Arkansas. And we knew kind of Trey Knox was going to emerge as that number one guy, but Simon's come along these past couple games, getting a few touchdowns, and got another one yesterday. He probably could have had the biggest play of the game yesterday, though, if he gets his hands a little bit further out when it comes to blocking that punt. And, you can certainly be critical of the way that you went about that. If you dive at that thing, you probably get it off. And I understand not wanting to rough the punter, but if you're taking it off his foot, that's probably not going to get called. And that could have been a huge swing in the game, because he probably would have had the opportunity, if not him, somebody else on the kicked special teams to pick that up and take it in for a touchdown. We could be talking about a completely different ball game. Again, Debo Williams, again, leading the team in tackles as he often does. When it comes to defense, I thought Marcellus Dial was pretty good in coverage yesterday. Had a couple of pass deflections, ended up having that sack, on the second series of the game where he's coming in off the edge, what I thought was really, really good. It wasn't a perfect day by any means, but you're kind of grasping at straws, trying to find somebody on the defense to give your flowers to at this point. But again, just not a great day overall from the entire team. But those are a couple of guys that I feel like you can at least highlight a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Dial. Dial's play has certainly improved as the season has gone along. Made some big strides. Tackling, number one, is something that stands out for me with Dial. And
he got injured too. So
yeah, I know. And everyone, it seems like, I don't know. Every time you would look at the TV yesterday, it felt like somebody else was going down. So it sucks. And kind of going into our next point a little bit, we'll look ahead, and then we'll go through the optimism glasses to close things out. But looking ahead, you got 4 straight home games to close out the year: Jacksonville State, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Clemson. If you can find a way to win the first 3, you have a chance to beat your arch rival to go to a bowl, which would be something spectacular. But no, also too, Clemson will have that in their minds as well. Give them something to play for, deny you from a bowl. But Tyler, going into this home stretch, how do you see South Carolina faring? Do you see them, like how just in general, like how do you think this home stretch is going to go? Can they become bowl eligible and still find a way to squeeze something out of the season, or is everything lost?
I'll say this. I think you look at all 4 of these games and you see a path for South Carolina to win them. Obviously, Jacksonville State this weekend, while they're not a slouch of a group of 5 team, they're solid. I think South Carolina should be able to win that. It may be a little bit close in the fourth quarter, but South Carolina shouldn't have a problem there. Vanderbilt, I mean, they're Vanderbilt, and they got run over by Ole Miss last night. Should be able to win that. Kentucky's a little bit of a toss-up to me, and I know like the ESPN FPI still has South Carolina favored, at least the last time I looked at it, to win that game, and that could just be one of those 4-quarter fights. But I see a path for South Carolina to win. And Clemson, how motivated are they going to be when that game rolls around is my biggest question. And they dropped 4-4 yesterday, losing on the road to NC State. I don't have their schedule in front of me, but there's a very realistic opportunity for both South Carolina and Clemson to go in this game at 5-6, fighting for the right to go to a bowl game. And again, for South Carolina, a team that making a bowl game is something that is a routine goal for them every single year. And I could see them being a little bit more motivated than a team that come into the season with, college football playoff aspirations that quickly evaporated and then just falling apart down the stretch, where they may come into that game and you want to beat your rival, obviously, but they just may not have the drive that South Carolina would have going into that game. So I'm optimistic that South Carolina at least has the opportunity to win these next 4 games and get to a bowl game. And, I dog on the Birmingham Bowl a lot because it's at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to SEC bowl games. But I take that at this point. Just the fact that you be able to play a 13th game, have those extra practices, be able to allow some of those guys that come in as early enrollees at the end of December to get some extra practices in. We talked about a guy like Pup Howard that came in and turned a lot of heads in preparation for the Gator Bowl at December last year. So just having that opportunity goes so far in just preparing for next season. And I want to see South Carolina have that opportunity. And again, you got to be perfect for the next 4 games to make that happen. We'll see how spirited and motivated they are with a noon kick against Jacksonville State next weekend. I think that'll kind of set the tone for how the remaining games go.
Yeah, I agree. And that noon kick against Jacksonville State, if Florida after a bye for homecoming, all the lights on you wasn't enough to motivate you to kind of get things turned around, it's going to be really, really hard to steer things in the right direction. Noon kick at home against Jacksonville State, but it's what they got to do. I mean, there's no more going on the road or any of that. So like it's put up or shut up time for South Carolina if you want to make something out of the season. And go ahead.
I was going to say, and the numbers back it up, this team plays tremendously better at home compared to on the road, and nearly 500 yards of offense averaging at home compared to what I pulled the numbers a little bit earlier, just over, just under 300 yards of offense when you're playing on the road. So that plays into South Carolina's favor. And just the fact you don't have to worry about traveling the next 4 weeks and you're in a comfortable home environment. And I know, you should be able to play good everywhere, but just the comfort of playing at home and not having to go through the travel and all that kind of stuff, I think that'll at least benefit South Carolina to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't forget Darude, the original guy from Sandstorm is coming for, I believe, Jacksonville State, right?
I think it's a Kentucky game.
Oh, yeah, Kentucky game. Correct. Yeah.
So Jacksonville State this weekend is when they're honoring the 2011 to 2013 11 win teams. I'll be very interested to see what kind of reaction Spurrier gets being back in Willie B. I'm assuming for the first time since he departed in 15.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. That reunion's always, cheeky, if you will. Right. I was at the last one, when he was at Florida, South Carolina and Florida. They honored him at halftime at Florida because they had his, winning teams there on the sidelines, and he got a warm welcome from the Gator fans. So I wouldn't expect anything super crazy from South Carolina fans. I think time has gone on long enough to where you can kind of appreciate him for what it was.
Certainly so, and he's for a program that went was it like one bowl game in 30 or 40 years for Lou Holtz got here, took you to one or two there, and then Spurrier really put the program on the map in
Yep.
the mid 2000s, and carried that over into the early 2010s. And while yes, the ending was certainly not pretty, you still appreciate what he did for you, and hope that Coach Beamer and this regime here can take you to those same heights in the near future. It's obviously not a great year here, but when you're recruiting the way that Beamer and company are, you hope that you can build that up pretty quickly and have some of those same goals and aspirations that Spurrier was able to take you to a decade ago.
Yeah, definitely going into the recruiting pitch for sure for guys this weekend. Like, look at what you can do. These guys were able to do it here. It's not impossible. And I certainly don't think it is. Like, it's, to be competing on the SEC level, and especially now the way that the scheduling is,
Sure.
without divisions or anything like that, it's a little bit, it's very clear what you have to do to get out of the SEC and into the playoff. And with the expanded playoff, a little different too. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out. Like, how do you view making the playoff? It's not as significant making the Final Four and stuff like that. So it'll be really interesting. I'm excited for the new playoff next year. I'm sure a lot of other teams are. But kind of getting into it a little bit, we've been talking about of a negative all show. But this is a segment I like to call the optimism glasses. I did it last week. You throw on the danger zone Dowell login shades. Shout out to Dowell because he's been doing a very good job with this offense. But
Yep.
turning on the optimism glasses, Tyler, give us something good to take away this show with, man. Like, because there's a lot of bad going on with South Carolina football right now. Where do you look when you've got your optimism goggles on?
I look at Optimism, and while it's less than ideal that you've had to play so many freshmen this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball, what that can mean going forward, we talk about recruiting and building over the next couple of years, having guys like Nick Harbor that have gotten so many reps, Tyshawn Russell, looking at the offensive line, Tree and Tro, guys like that, those guys having significant reps and what is otherwise an insignificant season in the grand scheme of things, that's going to put them so much farther ahead when you talk about next year. And you talk about a guy like Eamon Wardy that had to step up and play a key role in the defense last year. And while, yeah, he's had a struggle this year, again, not the best in coverage, but playing his normal safety spot's been pretty good. Jelon Kilgore, who's played, I'd say, the best out of anybody at that nickel corner spot. What's he going to be like next year after having all these reps and so on and so forth? Like, having so many young guys, well, yes, you didn't want to have to play them. That is hopefully going to benefit you next year and going forward because they've gotten so many reps, shaking off the rust to a degree in this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the freshmen because the freshmen are playing very, very well, right? Like, they're, like I said a bunch of times in this show, that there have been a lot of good individual performances mixed in with the whole as a bad, right? So I think, the freshmen playing it well is one thing, and then it should also excite you how well Beamer has been doing in recruiting. I think, getting a guy like Dylan Stewart and getting the Great Wall of Carolina and Cam Pringle, Josiah Thompson, those guys are going to be very, very big to your success. And now that you have kind of the core base in your recruiting class, it's about, going and filling the gaps in the correct way in the transfer portal, right? Like, because it's a big mix of that now. And obviously when you're starting out your program, you're not getting as many recruits in and that kind of thing. So it takes time to build it up to where you're starting to fill in the pieces like you should. So I think, the way Beamer's doing in recruiting right now should give you some hope. And then also too, that the guys that are in right now, the Nick Harbors, the Tree and Tros, the Pup Howards are performing. They're performing well. They're sticking up for themselves. I mean, they're playing well, and standing out really is the biggest thing, and impressing everyone inside the building, both on and off the field. I feel like every week we hear about how good of a person Nick Harbor is, on and off the field, and just there's a new story that always comes out. Shane says something how Nick thanked him after the touchdown or something like that. So I think, to have those guys in there learning from the vets like Spencer and Trey, like I brought up earlier, learning how to be a college football player and navigate this complicated and complex landscape that is being a college athlete nowadays. To have those veterans in there to bring up, your dogs, your recruiting class that, your couple classes that you've had, marked on the calendar for, can't wait till these guys get in. And the 2024 class is another one of those. And it's not necessarily finished yet, but, you have your core pieces there. I think that should give you a lot of hope as well. And then Dowell Loggins has this offense looking really, 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 really good. Schematically, it's been good. And Dowell, I mean, the biggest checkbox going into this year is can he call plays? And I think we've seen good from him. I think we've also seen bad, but the bad has been, okay, like he can learn from this now. Like it's one of those things where you know that he's going to watch it over, some game management stuff that you know you can do differently time in and time out. So I think there's a lot of good still in the South Carolina football program. You need to kind of flush this year behind once you get into the offseason, make a bowl or not. And you have a chance to, add kind of a sparkling light on top of it if you finish strong here. But yeah, you got to find a way to flush this going into next year.
It's one of those things when you look at Coach Beamer's tenure now at almost complete, 3 years, if you mix the orders of these seasons around, it would make a lot more sense. And I think people would be more okay with it. Beamer really overachieved in his first 2 years. Comes in 2021 and was only expected to win 2 or 3 games. They'll go out there and win 6 in the regular season, win the ball game against North Carolina. Like, wow, that's far and away more than what people expected. Last year, it looked like you were going to go 6-6 after that Florida game, and you pull off 2 of the biggest wins in program history, at least in recent memory, against Tennessee and Clemson. 8-game win regular season. Have a very spirited bowl game against Notre Dame where you're down a lot of guys because of injury and because of the transfer portal, and you end up 8-5, which is far exceeding people's expectations. So this is kind of the season that you were supposed to have in year number 1 that, yes, while in hindsight, looking back the past 2 years is definitely a step down. These kind of things just happen within the first 3 years of a program. It's unfortunate it's in year 3 instead of year 1 and year 2, but I have faith they'll be able to get back on track next year, hopefully stay healthy and just, continue to build on what you had in the first couple seasons.
Yeah, and the depth will certainly be better too, especially at that offensive line. Like we said, the Great Wall of Carolina is coming in, and it's going to be a force, especially when you have Tree and Tro learning as much as they are now. Just being able to be in there, be in a tough spot like Georgia, getting your first ever career start against the number 1 overall ranked Georgia Bulldogs is something to say. And they didn't allow it. Like I believe Tro allowed a pressure, but I mean, no sacks between the two of them. You'll have those guys be ready to lead the younger guys coming in. So I think you're setting the foundation with your younger guys and your recruits right now, the guys that Beamer is trying to recruit and actively going out and going get. So there's still a lot of light as we take off the optimism goggles and come back down to the real world to wrap things up. But Tyler, like we talked about all show, this team has some work to do. Next week against Jacksonville State, you have the chance to, beat the brakes off them. What do you need to see from this team next week that gives you a little hope that they might be able to win the last 3?
Just get back to the fundamentals. And again, specifically when talking about defense and how many times we've seen guys getting burned from just playing 5 yards off and, receivers on the other team catching in space, just doing the technical things right. Again, a team like Jacksonville State, well, again, they are one of the better group of 5 teams. From a talent standpoint, you should be able to take care of business against them, similar to what we saw against Furman, who's a very good FCS team at the beginning of the season. South Carolina picked up a pretty comfortable win there, and just having confidence and gaining that confidence back. Because when you go on a 4-game losing streak, it's really easy to feel down on yourself. And, I know from a national standpoint, people look at Jacksonville State and say, what's that win worth? A win's a win at this point in time. You can beat anybody. I don't care how you beat them. I don't care who the opponent is. Just being able to say we win in there, we handled our business, and we won a game at home is going to do a lot for this team, especially when you talk about having to go win the next 3 games after that against tougher competition, just to get yourself to a bowl game. So I want to see these guys playing technically sound football. I want to see them out there confident and showing that they're still engaged and trying their hardest.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's a really good take. I think, they need to go in confident, keep the confidence, right? We've heard, good weeks of practice leading up until this point, and, the energy is still there. We need to see it, especially this week. We know about all the toughest schedule stuff and all that. Well, this is your opportunity to have a weaker team and start to build a little bit to make some noise going towards the end of the season. So Tyler, it was a ball having you on again.
Absolutely.
Has anything changed up? Like, is there anything different where we can find you?
No. We've had a lot of things shift around at 107.5 the game over these past couple of months, but I'm still routinely from 9 to 3 every single day. Do a few more hours on my own now that Colin Taylor has left Gamecock Central and taken a big boy job with the university, which good for him. He definitely deserves it. He's been on the ground of the beat for a decade now, and that's a lot of hard work that you guys do. I don't envy the job that you guys do, because you guys have to work very, very hard, and you're all over the place, and do a great job bringing the coverage that you guys do over to Gamecock Central, which I certainly appreciate and helps me out with my job too. But yeah, I'm 9 to 3 every single day. I'm now from noon to 3 with Terry Ford. So that's new edition of the halftime show. But of course, I do the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Wes and Chris, every single day from 11 to 12. So yeah, pretty routine for the middle of the day on 107.5 The Game, but I enjoy it. And just wish we had some more fun things to talk about with this football season.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tune in, when I'm going to pressers, all that stuff. Always have to catch Tyler on the radio at some point throughout the day. Tyler, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you again for coming on. Excited to have you on again. Come basketball season, come football off season. Maybe we'll have some hopeful things to talk about with this football program after the recruits start to pile in a little bit more. All right, and that concludes this week's episode of The Walkthrough. As always, I'm your host, Intern Joe. Thank you again to our guest, Tyler Head, for coming on. Please tune in next week. I will be live with Mr. Mayuva for Talking Tuesday Nights. It will be a special Halloween themed. You guys will hopefully like my costume. We will see. But yeah, we will be live, I believe, 6 o'clock this week. Not 100% sure. Stay tuned to both of our Twitters for more info on that. And as always, we will have all of your coverage live after the Gamecocks take on the other Gamecocks in Jacksonville State, home at Williams-Brice on Saturday. So be sure to tune in for that as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, enjoy your Sundays, enjoy your weeks.